This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. I'm Sophie Ikenye. Our top stories. Aid agencies say Mozambique needs urgent life-saving relief as the death toll due to Cyclone Kenneth rises to 41.
Good evening, I'm Pumza Fishani, coming to you live from Johannesburg. With just 1 week to go ahead of the presidential elections, I'll be looking at what's happening with South Africa's free higher education plan.
Venezuela's political standoff explodes again into direct confrontation. Also in the program, Beauty in Braille. It's a fashion statement with a difference, style and slogans in Braille.
My Braille designs are made for all, to uplift and to inspire all. I don't see why blind people should not have great fashion, just like the sighted.
And in sports, a major boost for Algeria ahead of the Africa Cup of Nations as France-born Andy Delors pledges his allegiance to the Desert Foxes. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Authorities in Mozambique say the number of people who've died due to the Cyclone Kenneth has risen to 41. The storm made landfall in the province of Cabo Delgado, where it hit last Thursday. Aid agencies say the country needs urgent life-saving relief to deal with the aftermath of the storm. Now, the capital of the province is Pemba, and Focus on Africa's Lebudi Seko is there.
A resolve that defies the elements. People going about their daily lives here in Pemba. This could be on the banks of a river for all the water you can see. But those structures peeping out of it, they're people's homes. Hundreds of people had lived here, but now much of it is underwater.
This neighbourhood is called Joshina Michel. It's a residential neighbourhood, but you can see behind me a lot of it just totally underwater. I mean, it looks like a lake. Really difficult to kind of get around. People here will have spent years and years building homes for their families, and now so much of that has been destroyed. Lots of the people that did live here have been taken to local schools, which are being used as shelters as the authorities just try and keep people safe.
This school is where some of those from Joshina Michel were taken. Classrooms serve as a kitchen, a clinic and bedrooms for around 1,000 people. Many of these families have to sleep, eat and live with people they may not even know. Manasa Jamal told me that she has 4 children with her.
The water got into my house and then the cashew tree fell on it. The house was completely destroyed.
The authorities are struggling to help them.
There is no water. There has not been firewood until today. We haven't eaten today.
A doctor checks people over. The main problem, he says, is respiratory diseases brought on by the floods.
We
don't have enough medicine, but we have the basics, the essential medicine. If the patient's situation is more serious, then we have to send them to the health center.
This is the center of the government relief operation, where aid is brought in and sent out to those who need it. But with many areas so difficult to reach, making sure it gets to those who need it is going to be difficult and is likely to take quite some time. Lebudi Seko, BBC News, Pemba, Mozambique.
Let's now take a quick look at other stories making headlines across Africa. Sudan's ruling military council says it wants its leader, Lieutenant General Abdul Fattah al-Burhan, to head a future governing authority alongside civilians. It comes after transition talks between the army and the opposition stalled. The military council is demanding protesters open roads, bridges and rail tracks around their sit-in in Khartoum, raising tensions. Rwanda's Foreign Affairs Minister has for the first time confirmed the arrest of Calixte Nsabimana, also known as Sankara. He is the rebel leader of an armed group known as National Liberation Front, which had claimed taking over some of the southwestern parts of Rwanda. A few weeks ago, the Rwanda Investigation Bureau had dismissed reports of Sankara's arrest. Now, the spread of Ebola in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo appears to be accelerating, with the number of new cases recorded in the past 4 days increasing to more than 90. Nearly 900 people have died from Ebola in the country, making it the second largest outbreak of the disease. Almost 27 million voters and 48 parties. We're just 1 week away from finding out who will lead South Africa. Now, the country goes to the polls on the 8th of May with a lot at stake. Which way will the country go? Who are the major players? BBC Africa's Victoria Wahunda takes a look.
It's 25 years since South Africa's first democratic election. This time, voters have a record 48 parties to choose from. But there are really 3 you need to watch out for. The first is the ANC, the party Nelson Mandela used to lead. The party got about 62% of the vote last time around, but it's in big trouble. Many senior members are facing corruption allegations and claims that state institutions have been looted by politicians and their associates. That has affected everything, from the economy, which is struggling, to the state power company, which is battling to keep lights on and has brought in rolling electricity blackouts. The current leader, President Cyril Ramaphosa, came to office last year promising a fresh start and an end to corruption. The big question is whether voters believe him or his party anymore.
The main thing is to bring change to this community.
Someone who hopes they don't is this man, Mmusi Maimane. He leads what is currently the largest opposition party, the Democratic Alliance. A recent poll predicted it will get 16%, down on the 22% it got last time, but still making it the second largest party. But the DA has been rocked by rumors of divisions and has struggled to gain significant support among black people who are the majority. And there is the Economic Freedom Fighters, a relatively new kid on the political block, but still the third largest party. Led by Julius Malema, it's running on a socialist ticket and could scoop up votes from the ANC. It's predicted the EFF could get around 9% of the vote, which will be up from last elections. It's unlikely the ANC will lose its huge majority, but the thing to watch out for is how close it gets to the 50% mark, below which it will have to go into a coalition. If it does lose support, it will be an indication that South Africans are losing patience with the Party of Liberation and don't believe President Ramaphosa when he says he brings a new dawn.
Well, let's cross over to our correspondent, Pumza Fiklani, who's keeping an eye on things for us from Johannesburg. Pumza.
Now, the subject of free education is one that's divisive here for the main political parties, but it's an issue that is at the core of what young voters are looking for. 4 years ago, thousands of students at universities across the country took to the streets protesting against tuition fees. These were known here as the Fees Must Fall protests. I returned to the university that was at the forefront of this movement to find out what's changed since then. In 2015 and 2016, I covered the protests at the University of the Witwatersrand here in Johannesburg. The students there were at the forefront of the nationwide demonstrations. I remember it being an incredibly tense time and often ended in clashes between students and the police.
We've just been opened fire with stun grenades, tear gas.
To a degree, the students' demands were met. In 2017, former President Jacob Zuma announced that families with a combined income of less than $25,000 per year would no longer pay tuition fees. Education officials here say that has seen an increase of students from poorer families accessing tertiary education.
Free education works. I think it's important because if you're going to be serious about a digital transformation of the global economy, then you actually need skills. And actually, we need to ensure that skills are addressed. Most importantly, we need our universities to address inequality.
It's been 2 years since the announcement of free education, but at Wits University, how have things changed?
We do welcome that there are advancements that are happening and taking place, and that the student voice is much more heard and given an ear.
So I haven't seen any changes since 2015. I don't think much has changed in terms of access to education.
We still have a number of students who are sleeping in libraries right now, still have to find themselves squatting with friends.
The governing ANC plan is that by 2024, all undergraduate students will be fully funded by the government. The Democratic Alliance is the official opposition. They do not believe that free education is sustainable. They instead want to gradually improve funding and make sure that university fee hikes are kept to a bare minimum. The country's third largest party, the EFF, is a socialist party. They believe education shouldn't only be free, but compulsory until the level of an undergraduate qualification. One of the biggest questions, of course, is how much free education is costing the state. The World Bank estimates that the cost will more than double by 2022 to 172.2 billion rand. That's just about $12 billion per year. They say this isn't sustainable in the long term, especially if South Africa's economy continues to grow by less than 2%. Education is seen as an important part of this year's elections, and young people in particular will be looking at the policies of the political parties to help them decide who to vote for. Education officials here in South Africa have told me that access to quality education can help bridge the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And in a country where 27% of the population is unemployed, for young people, it's about improving their odds at a decent future. I'm joined now by a Vice-Chancellor at the University of Pretoria, Professor Tawana Kupe, for more on this. Professor, thank you so much for your time. Now, we know that it's been 2 years since the announcement of this new government subsidy. What has changed on the ground as far as you've seen?
I think that it has assisted the poorest of the poor and the children of those who earn an income of less than 350,000 as a household income. Those students are now particularly covered. And mind you, this covers a lot of students in a majority of the universities, historically black universities and others. But it has left out students whose parents are earn above 350,000, what we call the missing middle. That's the teachers of the children of policemen, teachers, nurses, and that category. But for the substantial majority in the universities, it's covered them, and so they are able to access higher education, and in the top university access higher quality education.
Now, this was one of the key promises made by the ruling African National Congress when it came into power in 1994. Why do you think it's taken so long, though, to get to this point?
I think that they found out there's competing priorities and couldn't actually deliver on the full. So if you listen to them, they actually emphasize that they'd always said the poor and the working class. But even on that, they didn't deliver until the fees must fall protest. So I think also somewhere along the line, there was a belief that people were able to pay. And also I think part of the dynamic was the following. University fees, in order to offer quality education, rose higher than the government subsidies could cover. So universities were left with no option but to increase their fees. And that increasingly made higher education inaccessible to the very group of people that they said they would cover. So I think that the fees must fall protest was a wake-up call to say, could you deliver on this particular kind of promise?
We're now sitting in a position where South Africa is likely to have more graduates, but will there be more jobs for them?
Interesting that is that, strictly speaking, the country needs more highly educated and trained people, specifically in some scarce skill areas like we need more doctors, we need more teachers, nurses, engineers, accountants and so on, especially from the black community. However, not all the universities offer the same level of education, partly because of disparities of resources, which are historical, and also this very fact that government subsidies haven't kept up with the cost of high-quality education. So some graduates find themselves out of employment. But from the top universities like mine, the University of Pretoria, 93% of the students get jobs 6 months after graduating. The balance of 7% are often actually doing postgraduate studies. So there's a number of inequities and inequalities we have to deal with in the system. First, actually ensure that all universities can give high quality education and that enrollments are aligned with the needs in the economy.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was Professor Tawana Kupe, they're the Vice-Chancellor from the University of Pretoria. Now, this year also marks something significant in South Africa. It's 25 years since the dawn of democracy, but persistent inequality can be seen everywhere here. So for many young people, a chance at a quality education is about reversing the legacy of apartheid. Now, back to you, Sophie.
Homes up Fiklani for us there in Johannesburg. Thank you. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come, Egypt international Mohamed Salah joins in the criticism of the ticket prices for this summer's Africa Cup of Nations. I'm Sophie Ikenya and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The top story on this program, authorities in Mozambique say the number of people who've died due to Cyclone Kenneth has risen to 41. Now, violent clashes are taking place between protesters and armed security forces in Venezuela. The demonstrations come hours after opposition leader Juan Guaido said in a video message that now was the time to remove President Nicolas Maduro from power. The BBC's Vera Kwakofi reports.
Gunfire and tear gas in Caracas. Clashes broke out between security forces and supporters of Venezuela's opposition leader Juan Guaido near the La Carlota military base. Venezuela's self-declared interim president had appeared in a video earlier, flanked by men in military uniform. He announced that the final phase of his plan to oust President Nicolas Maduro had begun and that troops had joined him.
Today, a segment, an important part of the armed forces, not only in Caracas, but in the entire country, has put itself on the side of the Venezuelan constitution. The call is for everyone to come out to the streets at this moment to support what we have built over years. We're now in the streets not only with the international community and not only as citizens, but now with the national armed forces who are backing the citizens, the future and progress.
Shots were heard at a rally outside the base, and witnesses said men in military uniform were exchanging fire with soldiers acting in support of Mr. Maduro. It's the latest move in the struggle for power in a country that began in January, when Mr. Guaido declared himself interim president, claiming Mr. Maduro's re-election last year was illegitimate. He's received backing from the United States and several Latin American countries. Venezuela's military had remained supportive of Mr. Maduro, and he insisted on Twitter that they still have total loyalty to him and called for the people to resist what he called a coup. It's unclear just how much military backing Mr. Guaido has, meaning this situation is far from over. Vera Kwakofi, BBC News.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. Let's find out what's happening in the world of sport. Peter.
Many thanks, Sophie. And let's start with football now, and a major boost for Algeria ahead of this summer's Africa Cup of Nations, as Andy Delors has become the latest former France youth international to commit to playing for the Desert Foxes. The 27-year-old Montpellier striker played for France at under-20 level, but has now told French journalists that he is drawn to his maternal side and is working on switching allegiance to Algeria. Meanwhile, manager of French Ligue 1 side Nice, Patrick Vieira, says his Algeria defender Youssef Attal is not for sale. That's after the player became the first Algerian to score a hat-trick in Ligue 1 for 33 years. Attal, who is a right-back but played in left midfield on Sunday, netted all 3 goals in Nice's 3-0 home win over Guingamp to register the first hat-trick of his career. Algeria in Group C of the Nations Cup with Kenya, Senegal and Tanzania. Now, some bad news for the Nigerian defender Nura Abdullahi. He's been forced to retire from football on medical advice at the age of just 21. He has a contract with AS Roma until June 2021 and was initially placed on a period of rest by his club after heart tests in March last year. It's understood the club will honor his contract and he will now take up a non-playing role with them. A backlash from football fans and Egypt international Mohamed Salah has prompted a rethink of ticket pricing for this summer's Nations Cup. Supporters were angry at the high cost to watch the hosts play, with the cheapest tickets costing approximately $12 US. The Egypt Football Association now says it will re-examine its prices, which were just announced on Monday. Now, the Champions League returns tonight with the first of two semi-final matches. This evening's hosts, Tottenham Hotspur, have reached the stage for the first time ever, knocking out mighty Manchester City to get this far. That they're in the Final Four is remarkable, but this evening they'll be without their top scorer and captain, Harry Kane. Manager Mauricio Pochettino has been praised for his work at the club with limited resources. He says he and the team are living a dream.
I am living my dream. I am already living my dream. To be in semi-final with Tottenham was a dream in the past, 5 years ago, and we are living a dream.
Well, their opponents tonight are Ajax Amsterdam, who are experiencing something of a resurgence. They haven't reached this stage of the competition since the 1996-97 season, but having dumped last year's finalist Real Madrid and Juventus in the last two rounds, analysts are beginning to take this young side seriously. And their Cameroon international goalkeeper Andre Onana says playing away from home no longer scares the team.
When I see the way we play in Champions League, I think we play better out than at home. But normally, everything is more strong at home, but we are more strong away. Because we won against Madrid away. Yeah. We won against Juventus away. It's like something happened, you know. But I think this team, we look very young, but we have experience already because we've been playing Europa League and European competition for long already.
Now, the World's Sports Court will rule on South African runner Caster Semenya's challenge against rules regulating testosterone in female athletes on Wednesday. The double Olympic champion is fighting regulations imposed by the International Association of Athletics Federations that compel hyperandrogen athletes or those with differences of sexual development to lower the testosterone levels before they wish to compete as women. The IAAF says the rules are essential to preserve a level playing field. Semenya has remained largely silent through the court battle, but scores of others have vocally rallied behind her, including a global coalition of nations and scientific experts who argue that testosterone is an arbitrary and unfair measure for determining gender. And that ruling, whatever way it goes, is likely to have a profound impact on the future of women's sports. We'll definitely have the details here for you on Focus on Africa. But for now, Sophie, that's your sports.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for that. Now, fashion is full of trends, from disco flares to ripped jeans, and Tapiwa Dingwiza is hoping her work will be just as memorable. The Zimbabwean designer makes clothes that feature positive slogans in Braille. She told the BBC's 1 Minute team what inspired her to create the fashion line.
It is important that people from the blind community have fashion that represents and celebrates them. My name is Tapiwa Dingwiza. I'm a fashion designer who incorporates Braille into my designs. I was born and raised in Zimbabwe, and I went to a school that was also attended by blind children. I didn't get to interact with many of them due to social barriers. Now, as a fashion designer, I've bridged the gap by creating a collection that is inclusive and meaningful. All the designs have got personal and motivational messages. It's a very challenging yet innovative process, which includes a lot of research, experimentations for Braille embroidery and embossing. In its very nature, fashion is about inclusivity, and my Braille designs are made for all, to uplift and to inspire all. I don't see why blind people should not have great fashion, just like the sighted.
This one means confidence and determination.
Fascinating. But don't forget, you can get in touch with me and some of the team on Twitter. I'm @CKenye. That's all from the program for now. Thanks for your company.